Welcome to the fourth episode in a Legendarium series about the Roman conquest of Britain. In part 4, Boudicca, we will talk about life in Roman Britain and how it wasn't so good for former British rulers like Boudicca, who led a revolt against Roman rule. Yet, after several dramatic battles, Boudicca was ultimately defeated and Roman rule restored. Britain changed greatly following the Roman conquest. Towns began popping up to service the Roman legions occupying the island. Construction workers, self-taught engineers, tavern keepers, and brothel masters all plied their trades, often serving soldiers. As Roman legionaries received their pay in gold and silver coins, within a generation, this Roman currency replaced the old British trade systems. Inside town markets, one could spend those coins on goods imported from across the empire, like Italian marble, Syrian spices, or Spanish olives. Britons also learned to eat garum, a Roman sauce made from rotten fish guts. It made a stench so strong that people were forbidden from making it in their own homes. And Claudius, the emperor who had conquered Britain, became worshipped as a god by the Britons in the temple of the deified Claudius. However, those who benefited from Roman rule tended to be nouveau riche, up-and-comers, who learned at the knees of their Roman teachers and profited much by it. On the other hand, outside the already Romanized southeast, the old ruling aristocracy found themselves replaced by Romanized upstarts. Among this old endangered elite was a woman named Boudicca. She was the wife of Prasutagus, a Roman client king who ruled the Iceni in the east of Britannia. Sensing that the wind blew in Rome's direction, Prasutagus promised to pay tribute to Rome in exchange for keeping his crown on his head, not to mention his head. When Prasutagus died in 61 AD, he left half his territory to Rome and one half to his two daughters with Boudicca. He likely hoped to ease his nation into the Roman Empire and ensure that his family would retain high status. However, by then, Rome had come under the rule of the greedy and cruel Nero. Now the careers, if not the lives, of the procurators depended on helping to finance Nero's lavish lifestyle and opulent games, which meant lots and lots of money exacted from the subject Britons. Indeed, the Romans had already tested the loyalty of the Briton nations very much by their endless demands for young men to fight their wars in the north and west. When the legions came to Boudicca's household to do an accounting of all the goods, treating them as spoils of war, Boudicca, needless to say, objected. The Romans addressed her concerns by flogging her, and then forced themselves on her daughters in front of her. Filled with vengeful rage, Boudicca gathered an army, first of Iceni and then of the neighboring Trinovantes, who still remembered how the Romans had crushed them in battle more than a generation ago. Boudicca's rebels went on the offensive, sacking and burning Roman towns. With the Roman governor away fighting in the west, in what is today Wales, Boudicca's rebels easily made their way to Camulodunum, modern-day Colchester. When he learned of the revolt, the procurator Decianus sent only 200 armed slaves to protect the Romans and pro-Roman Britons in Camulodunum from Boudicca's thousands. Needless to say, the 200 were ambushed by Boudicca's rebels and wiped out. According to Roman chroniclers, when Boudicca's rebels entered Camulodunum, they forced the wealthy women to remove their clothes, hung them from wooden frames, and then chopped off their arms and legs. Children were left dangling from nooses. Still others endured the horrific punishment of crucifixion, nailed or tied to a wooden cross and left to die of slow suffocation. Of course, the Romans may have invented these sensational tales to make their enemy appear all the more frightening and their eventual victory all the more spectacular. Whether these tales are true or not, the surviving members of the garrison hid in the temple of the deified Claudius. but Boudicca's numbers soon overwhelmed them, and she burned the town so completely that a layer of soil darkened by fire and ash would be found centuries later by scholars. The fire burned so hot that it warped Roman coins scattered in the streets. Next, Boudicca headed to Londinium. By then, Gaius Paulinius had arrived, but upon seeing the size of Boudicca's army, decided to abandon Londinium to its fate. What Boudicca did in Camulodunum, she also did in Londinium. Next, she headed northwest towards Verulamium, where most of the Romans followed Paulinius west. Paulinius baited Boudicca to come further and further west until he found a perfect battleground, a clearing surrounded by wooden slopes that would force Boudicca into a funneled attack where her numbers would count for nothing. Paulinius had only 11,000 men at his command, including 7,000 legionaries and 4,000 Briton and Germanic auxiliaries. Boudicca had almost 50,000 men at her command. But while the Romans wore bronze armor, Boudicca's soldiers fought in trousers and boots, often without shirts to show off their physique, while aristocrats like Boudicca fought in chariots. The Romans also had iron discipline on their side. According to a Roman chronicler, Boudicca gave this speech to her men before the battle. "I am descended from mighty men, but I am not fighting for my kingdom and wealth now. I am fighting as an ordinary person for my lost freedom, my bruised body, and my outraged daughters. Consider how many of you are fighting and why. Then you will win or perish. That is what I, a woman, will do. Let the men live in slavery if they wish." Unfortunately, that fine speech was likely a Roman invention, romanticizing a fallen enemy and critiquing the empire's sins. Fine speech or not, the Britons opened with a wave of missiles from chariot archers, followed by an infantry charge armed with long slashing swords and short spears. They funneled into the defile picked by Paulinius, crowded together so tight that they could barely move their arms. Before the rebels hit the Roman lines, the lightly armored Britons were cut down in huge numbers by a wave of javelins. The Romans then advanced, striking enemies in the face with their shields and stabbing with their short swords. And this is where Roman discipline really showed itself. While the Britons were going on nothing but individual courage, the Romans had the ability to hold a line together even when outnumbered 5-1. Britain courage broke, and when they tried to escape, the warriors ran straight into their own wagon laager, which carried their wives and children, who had come to watch the battle. Trapped, the Britons were massacred. Women, children, and even draft animals were slaughtered. Boudicca escaped in her chariot and died only a few days later, either of suicide or illness. Why was Boudicca defeated? In military terms, the battle served as a showpiece for Roman discipline and battle tactics. In addition, the British tribes of the southeast remained loyal to Rome, having reaped its benefits for generations. During the Victorian era, Boudicca would be reinvented as a living symbol of fighting British spirit, though she would have never seen herself as British, and indeed fought a war against other British tribes. And for all the ongoing historical interest that she generates, Boudicca ultimately did not stop the Romanization of Britain. The Romans rebuilt the town she burned within a generation, and the Romans ruled Britain for 350 years. That wraps things up for this episode of The Legendarium. If you liked it, press like. If you want to see more, press subscribe. And if you've got anything to say, let me know in the comments section. Thanks again for joining me, and I hope that you have a great rest of the day.